This is how I make the drop stitch braid pattern on a double layer beanie hat on the knit side of the beanie. I'm going to mainly focus on how to make the drop stitch braid on the knit side in this video, and then in the video description I will have another video linked on how to finish the beanie. First, you're going to cast on with your yarn of choice. I start at my white needle and I go over and under each needle one time around till I get back to my white needle. Then I put the yarn into the yarn holder and I put the yarn on the floor in front of me to help with tension. And I have this one in the middle tension of my tension bar, and I cranked out 62 rows to start. Once you get between that 60 and 62 rows, now we are going to cast off with our circular knitting needle, because the easiest way I found to do the knit side drop stitch is to remove it from the machine and then do the drop stitch and then put it back onto the machine. So don't worry, this is not very hard at all. Just follow me and you'll be able to do it. So we're going to take our yarn, and we don't want to remove it because we're going to use that to make the rest of our double layer beanie hat once we're done with the drop stitch. So I just put it in the middle of the machine for now, and then we're going to cast off. I have the yarn end at my white needle because that's the 48th needle, and then I start picking up the stitches at my number 1 needle. So I make sure my 48th needle hooks the yarn, and then now we're going to pick up these stitches with our circular knitting needles. They are attached with the cord, and these are for hand knitting in the round, but they also work really good for picking up and holding your live stitches off your machine here. So I'll just show how to do a few of these, and then I'll speed it up for us. And so the other thing I like to do is I'm taking a stitch marker here and I'm marking my number 1 needle with the orange stitch marker, and then I'll use the pink one to mark the 48th stitch as well. So I just keep them in mind, what was my first stitch and what was my 48th stitch, and I can put them back on the machine the same way. So I'm just going to speed this up. I'm going to pick up each stitch, and now it's removed off of the machine. And so now we're going to drop our stitches. So remember, the orange stitch was my number 1. So I'm just going to remove those off of my knitting needle. So I removed the number 1 and the number 2 stitch. And then I'm just going to remove my number 1 stitch marker for the time being. We'll put them back on when we're done. And now we're just going to drop the number 1 and the number 2 stitch. And you can just kind of pull these, or you can use your loom pick. And I drop them all the way down. You don't want to go all the way down to your cast on. I left about 2 or 3 rows before my cast on. And for the hat, you don't have to be as particular, but if you're going to do a scarf, you want to make sure you stop your drop stitch at the same time if you're going to do multiple braids so they look even. With the beanie hat, since it cinches at the top, this is a really nice beginner project to learn how to do this, because it kind of camouflages if like you don't drop as many stitches on your second or third braid and so forth, since it cinches. So once we get down there, we're going to pick up those 2 loops. And you just want to be careful that you don't drop it all the way down. So we pick up our 2 loops and we put it on our crochet hook, like here. And so you can see we still have a couple rows left over from our cast on. And now, since we have the 2 loops on our crochet hook, we're going to pick up, I personally like 3 bars at a time, doing a slip stitch, which makes the drop stitch braid look. I've also seen it called a cable braid or a drop stitch braid. Or a drop stitch chain. I've seen it called a few different things, but here's how we do the drop stitch braid, going back up to the top. And I like the look of 3 at a time, but you can do as many as you would like. And then the only thing is, just like the other braid tutorials, is you want to end with 2 stitches left on your crochet hook at the end, because those are going to go back onto your knitting needles of your machine. And so this is just, we're doing it on the knit side. And then this is where we do our drop stitch braid 2, showing on the knit side, so you get the braids showing up on the knit side. And I'm just taking 3 at a time, and you kind of pull them so they tighten up your braid as well as you're going. Now, if you get to the end of your stitches and you end up having 3 loops left on your crochet hook, drop those, and on your second to last slip stitch, put 4 of these bars. It's going to really camouflage. You're not going to notice that 1 extra bar. And this is just so you can have 2 stitches left on your crochet hook at the very end to put back on your machine. So now I'm just going to speed this up doing our braid all the way up to the top. And here we are just finishing our braid. And so this one ended up working out. I have 3 bars and then 2 bars left. So let's just say, so that's a total of 5 bars, right? Till we get to the back, to the top. If I had 6 bars in this one right here that I just did, I would have done 4. And then I would have the 2 left over. So it just depends on how many stitches you drop, just to make sure. But I've done it where I've accidentally had that 6 bars left over, so I did 4 and then 2, and you cannot tell that there's a 4th bar in there. And so then here's my 2. Now I have 2 loops left on my crochet hook, and that's what we want because that's our number 1 and number 2 stitch. Now we put these 2 stitches back onto our knitting needle, and then you just want to put it on the opposite needle that you dropped it from. So I dropped it from my right, and now I'm putting it on my left needle. It doesn't matter which way you want to do this, just be consistent if you're dropping from your left to your right or your right to your left. And then I made 4 braids for this hat, and I put on my stitch marker as well to remind me of what my number 1 stitch is. So I put that on here. So my orange stitch marker is for my number 1 stitch. And then after this is on, I'm going to move on to my next braid. For this hat, I did a total of 4 braids, but you could do as many braids as you would like. 5. And so then to go on to your next braid, you just want to take the stitches you don't want to drop and move them from your right needle over to our left needle. But like I said, it doesn't matter which way you want to move the stitches from one needle to the other, just stay consistent so you're working in the round. So I move them over, and then once I get to my next spot, I did my 12th and 13th stitch. Those are the ones that I drop and do my next braid. So here are my next ones, and then again you do the same thing, just drop them off the needle and then pull them all the way down. And then again I did the same thing. I don't go all the way down to the cast on. I leave a row or 2. And then we just start the same thing, doing our braid, and we do the slip stitch all the way back up, leaving 2 bars at the end to go back onto our machine. So I pick up the 2 loops that we dropped, and then I start picking up 3 bars at a time, doing the slip stitch all the way back up to the top. Again, at the end you want just 2 bars left on your crochet hook to put that back onto the machine. And then here is an example. If you have 6 bars left, just do 4 bars at that second to last stitch, and then you have just 2 bars left over, and you really don't notice that 4th bar in that second to last stitch. It just disappears and blends away, and put it back onto your needle. And then continue doing this, moving your stitches over. And so now once all your braids are done, you just want to put the project back onto your machine. So to do this, I start at my number 1 needle, and you just want to make sure that it's your purl side that's facing up or out, and that's the bar side. The knit side is the V stitch, and that's going to be at the bottom. And then you're going to put it 1 stitch at a time back onto each needle. So I start with my number 1, and then I continue all the way around until they're all back on to the machine. And then the easiest way to put the stitches back onto the machine is to use your loom pick to do this. And then also you want it to be hooking up and under those needles, and so it pulls it down into the machine. You don't want it on the pegs, because if you go all the way around, once you go back to making the rest of your rows, once it goes around once, that needle is going to come up and it's going to pop that stitch off of your needle if it's on the 2 pegs. But if it's hooked under the needle will come up, and then it will push that loop down onto those 2 pegs and then catch new yarn, and then everything is locked into place. To crank the rest of your rows, you're going to put your working yarn back into your yarn holder, and then I like to start it on the left side of my white needle so the number 1 needle catches the yarn. Once all the rows are cranked, you're going to cast off like normal with a needle and thread. To see how to finish the beanie hat and complete it, I have another tutorial linked that shows all this in the video description below. Thank you so much for watching and happy crafting.